Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our webinar series. Today we have Jen Chou. She's going to be presenting her work on investigating links between post-mortem carcass inspection outcomes and tail biting injuries in pigs, a potential welfare surveillance tool. And so she'll give the presentation, and then once she's done, feel free to type in questions in the chat box, and we will get to them at the conclusion of her presentation. Jen, over to you. I'm really looking forward to your presentation and so glad you made time for it.
Thanks, Laura, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Welcome everyone to my talk. And my name is Jen Chou. I think most of you know me probably as Jen. I just finished my PhD in January this year and from the University of Edinburgh. So my PhD is mainly about tail biting, enrichment, and also a little bit of dietary fiber, which I will mention later for a moment. So today I'm actually going to talk about kind of an extension of my PhD project. I will be using the data I collected during my PhD, but then it is not like officially part of my PhD, but we're interested to look at the link between the meat inspection data and then also about the tail lesions we score in the slaughterhouse and whether it can be a potential good welfare surveillance tool. So this is, of course, my co-authors are my supervisors, Rick Dan Killing, and also my colleague in Chagas, Maria Costa. And my PhD is also a collaboration between the University of Edinburgh, SRUC, and Chagas in Ireland. So I will just briefly introduce you to tail biting in case you're not very familiar about that. And this is probably the background of our study, and also tell you a little bit about the story of my PhD project, and then why we're thinking about doing another study on slaughterhouse surveillance of tails, and what we know so far, what is the possible future application, how can we make use of this tool, and then also talk a little bit about our study. And then I really do welcome all feedback because this work is still kind of work in progress. So any feedback or suggestion will be very welcome. And then hopefully we can find out more about how we can use this surveillance tool. So if some of you are not familiar with pig behavior, so tail biting is a damaging behavior in pigs. So the pigs, they manipulate each other's tails, and which can cause injuries and pain. And the more serious case, it could cause spinal infection or even premature death. So it is a multifactorial behavior, which just means that it is quite difficult to control. There are so many factors involved in it. For example, the environment, the environmental enrichment, stocking density, how you feed the pigs, and then even ventilation, season, genetics, a lot of factors involved. And it is a welfare issue because, of course, tail biting injuries are very painful and also quite stressful for the pigs. And also it is a production issue because either the premature death or the spinal infection, they can all cause economic loss for the producers. So it is quite difficult to control. So one of the things the producers are used to do in the past is trying to tail dock the pigs to control that. So basically just shorten the pig's tail. In Ireland, where I carry out all of my experimental work, over 99% of the pigs were docked back in 2012 based on Harley's study. But actually in the EU, tail docking has been banned as a routine practice. If we look at even the council directive in 2008, but if you trace back as early as 1994, already the tail docking ban has been in place. So, but then of course it cannot be done as a routine practice. There are certain conditions that the producer can actually do that. So that's why it is quite difficult to enforce the ban. And based on a study done in 2018 in the European Union, 24 countries surveyed, still 77% of the overall prevalence of tail docking was found. So it's still quite high. we're still trying to figure out how to control the problem of tail biting. And in the meantime, also another issue is the housing system we use. So the most common indoor commercial housing system, they use fully slatted floor. So as you can see on this picture, there are gaps on the floor. This is used to facilitate the manure to go underneath the floor, so easy collection, maintain the high hygiene. But then at the same time, it is difficult to provide substrates on the floor for the pigs to manipulate, which they love to do that. So in Ireland, an estimate of 80% of the farms are using fully slatted floor. So when I started my PhD in 2015, we're really trying to figure out if there's any practical solution and also economically feasible solution that we can find to tackle the issue of tail biting, and also and also to see that, you know, if we want to stop tail docking, and can we actually rear intact tail pigs in this kind of system. So our focus at that time was more on environmental enrichment and also on diet, because of course, if we want to say economically feasible, so we don't want to, so the producer don't want to change the whole system. So we try to find some solution that can be done in the that's compatible in the current system. So that's why we focus on environmental enrichment and diet. So I'll just give you a kind of overview of the timeline of my PhD. I started back in 2015 in October, and then back in 2016, earlier on, we were still using docked pigs, because at that time we're trying to really identify what is the suitable wooden enrichment materials that can be used in this type of system I just mentioned. So wood is a material that's favored by the Irish producers, and then also we do have plenty in Ireland, which can be attained cheaply and easily available. So that's why we're trying to figure out. I have done one study on the commercial farm and also one in our earlier experimental unit. And at that time, also our new research facility just under the final stage of the construction. So we're also waiting for it to be ready and be used. So starting from 2016, our research facility was completed, and then so we started to try to rear undocked pigs. So in 2016, I have one experiment where we look at more simplified enrichment and also the different dietary fiber. And then in 2017, we conducted another smaller pilot study to look at more enhanced enrichment strategies. And then the last big study I done was in 2018. So we also look at enrichment. So the data I'm going to use for the current study I'm going to talk about the slaughterhouse surveillance. I'm going to use data collected from these three studies just to make it easier. I'm going to call this study 1, and this one study 2, and this one study 3 in my later slides. So just chronologically, there are 3 studies. And in order to really to compare the results or even combine the results to look at what we want to look at in the slaughterhouse. So we first take a look at the methods. Actually, I use really similar methods across these 3 studies. So I use the same lesion scoring system. On this side, you can see the example of the tail lesion scoring system. This was developed by the Berwick Dock Consortium back in 2015 when I first started. So we have one score for the damage we see on the tail, and then one score for the presence of blood, and also another score for the level of tail loss. So I use the same system across all my studies. And then also, of course, the pigs were all raised in the same research facility I just mentioned, and they were practically managed the same way, except the experimental treatment we gave them. And then I also took very similar behavior measures across these 3 studies. All the pigs were followed from weaning until finishing. So we have their life history records. And then also we did slaughterhouse inspection, of course, for all 3 studies. We record the tail lesion. We have different levels of detailed visceral lesion scoring, also the condemnation records. So before I go into these 3 studies, just briefly mention that before these 3 studies, actually for my all of my studies I've done during my PhD, we all look at tail lesions in the slaughterhouse, even for the duck pigs in the earlier studies. And also in Irish slaughterhouse, we always obtain the condemnation reports from the veterinary inspectors on site. And also actually for study 3, I also looked very close up of the mouths of the carcass of the pigs. Because one of the concern for the producers to use wooden enrichment, they fear that there might be damages to the gum or the tongue of the pigs when they're playing and chewing all those wood posts. But then actually we didn't find any damage related to wood use. So just to show that we have built up our experience in the data collection in the slaughterhouse, and also that the data in the slaughterhouse did give us quite a good insight of some of the parameters we want to look at. So I'm just going to start talking a little bit, not too much, about all those 3 studies. So in the first study, I mentioned that we look at one single enrichment and then dietary fiber. So basically, we have so either the pigs have a high fiber diet or standard fiber. So we make sure that the difference is big enough. So for the winner, it's about 1.5 times the standard. And for the finisher, it's about almost twice the fiber level of the standard diet. And for the enrichment, so they only have 1 enrichment per 14 pigs in a pen. So you can see on the picture, they either have a blue rubber floor toy or they have 1 spruce post. So we select these 2 based on the previous study that these 2 are the ones that the pigs interacted with the most. So in the winner stage, they have either a toy or a wood post, and then in the finisher stage, they either keep having the same one, or we further have some pigs, they switch to another toy. So we have in total 672 pigs in 48 pens. And then in this study also, the stocking density we use are very similar to the EU minimum requirement. So for the winner stage, our stocking density was 0.45 square meters, where the regulation is 0.4. So we just want to simulate what will happen on the commercial farm if they, start using rearing undocked pigs, and then they have this more minimal environment, and they just change the diet. So what we found is that although we hypothesized that giving them high fiber diet can reduce tail biting, because we know from the sow studies that when pigs have a high fiber diet, they usually become less active because they feel a higher sense of satiety. So they don't perform as much foraging behavior. But then actually we found the opposite. We actually find more tail biting in the high fiber treatment. Some of the reasons we found is that one thing is that we found that their feces become really soft because of the high fiber, and then that's why their hindquarters are usually more dirty, which may attract other pigs' attention. Another thing is that because our facility is using single space feeders, so when they have high fiber diets, they may spend more time eating their diet per meal, because they need to chew more, they need to masticate. So that's also another risk factor for tail biting if you stay in the single space feeder for too long. And then we found that the enrichment items we give them didn't really differ too much in their effect to control tail biting. Overall, we found a high level of tail biting. So we have 26 tail biting outbreaks. We had quite a high threshold in terms of how we define tail biting outbreaks. I'm not going to go into that. If you're interested, I can talk a bit more about that later. But then we still record 26 very bad tail biting outbreaks, and 70% of the pigs have some level of tail loss at the end of the study. And then almost 200 pigs were bitten and need to be removed for medical treatment during that study. And then we have to remove 11 pigs permanently because of tail biting. So the results are not very good. So that's why in study 2, we started to think about more diverse enrichment strategies. And this time, because it is a smaller scale study, we only use 96 pigs. And then we want to really find out all the enrichment we can use on pigs in this type of housing system. So, and then we also, and this time we also we reduced the stocking density a bit. So we have 12 pigs a pen compared to the previous study's 14. And then we also start giving them some enrichment during the, in the suckling period, so in the farrowing house. So it is quite a complicated design, but in anyway, in short, we picked 32 items in total, and then we kind of grouped them into four different combinations of 8 different items, so based on their different properties. And then some of the pigs have the same combination through the winner and the finisher stage, and some of them we further swap their combination every 2 weeks just to give them a bit more variety. So you can see in the picture is just some examples of the enrichment they get. That's, you know, they are compatible to this housing system, and then they're biological relevant for the pigs. And then also give you some example of the things we actually try to use. We have an elevated rack, we have straw, grass, shredded paper, sawdust, miscanthus, different things. Now all a lot of different things hanging there, and also some things on the floor. And I love to show this video. I hope you haven't seen this before, but then if you did, it's always good to see the pigs play with enrichment. So this is just an example of one of the pens. So this is 2 weeks after weaning. So this is a same group. So they get the same items throughout the winter stage. And then you can see that we have 8 different items in the pen. And of course, I'm now fast forwarding it, but if you watch closely, you can see that there are indeed still some manipulation of the pen mates. So ear biting a little bit, tail biting a little bit, but then because there are so many different items in the pen, there are always some, you know, interaction between the pigs, and then they are distracted, and then they don't keep nibbling on their pen mates, and then they actually play with all the different items we provided to them. And I think this is what we really want to see, that, you know, the pigs are finding this enrichment interesting, and then they will explore them and use them. And then they are actually stimulating their behavior repertoire, and even if we don't have any substrate on the floor. So what we found in the previous study is that we don't have any tail biting outbreaks, and only we have 1 pig with some level of tail loss, and then the tail leading score are all pretty mild, which is really positive. So that's why in the 3rd study, we stick to the enrichment, more complex enrichment strategies. And this time we want to look at how much of the effect we saw was because of the pre-weaning enrichment exposure. And then for the post-weaning enrichment, we think that it is still important to give them multiple items, and then they have to be biological relevant. But at the same time, we want to choose some different strategies that can balance between the pig and also the producer, because it is quite labor consuming in the previous trial. So we pick the items that are more durable, so that they don't have to be changed that often. But then we still have 8 different items. So all the pigs had the same 8 items, so in the winner or in the finisher stage. But then they differ from the 3 different replenishment strategies. So for the high pigs, I check them 3 times daily, and then they have basically the enrichment at Lebanon. Anytime they finish anything, I will just replace them or replenish them. And I should say that we decided to use grass in this study because, yeah, we can get grass really, actually for me it's for free. In Ireland, we have plenty of that, so we stick to grass. So they get a higher quantity of grass. And for the median group, their enrichment were only checked once per day. And if they use up any other items, I will only replace them 2 days later, and they get a lower quantity of grass. And for the low one, so I only check them 3 times per week, and then anything gone will only be replaced 7 days afterwards, and then they're also getting a lower quantity of grass. So we try to look at the pre-weaning enrichment, yes or no, and couple with the 3 different strategies post-weaning. So what we found is that the pre-weaning enrichment didn't really have too much effect on the tail lesions or their general behavior we observed. But the high post-weaning replenishment strategy actually did result in less harmful behavior, and it also have a positive effect on their growth performance, which is quite surprising. But then we're really happy to see that a good enrichment strategy can help them not just in terms of welfare, but also in terms of growth. And if we compare the overall tail biting performance, so you can see the red bar is the previous, so I compare with the diet study. And then you can see that in terms of the pigs affected by tail biting treatments, it was significantly reduced. And also in terms of the tail loss score, this study also performed much better, although we still also have tail biting outbreaks, 14 of them from 12 pens. So because we have these 3 studies that we're all using undocked pigs, and then so we really want to see that can the slaughterhouse inspection actually tell us a different, status those pigs were in. So they are kind of in a different, really quite different housing, and then different types of enriched environment or not. So we kind of want to see that the data we collect in the slaughterhouse, can that reflect that, and can we actually know a little bit about this animal's welfare, because we have the life history of those pigs. So in terms of the slaughterhouse inspection and welfare surveillance, we kind of have a tradition. So when I started my PhD, I have a colleague, Aninka Van Stefferen. Her PhD was all about finding the association between tail lesion and the carcass measures. So we're really paying attention to the tail lesion back then. And then more recently, we found that there has been a trend in using slaughterhouse data as a welfare surveillance tool. More and more studies are suggesting that. This is just some examples, the reference I put here. So many authors pointed out that there are advantages in doing slaughterhouse inspection. So it is more accessible, because we know that on the pig farms, they usually practice very strict biosecurity rules. It is very difficult to get into a farm, or even try to go to different farms within a short time. Especially now with African swine fever, whenever you go to the farm, you always carry kind of the burden or risk about spreading the disease into a farm. And then there is also advantage in efficiency. Sometimes you can collect maybe data from 20 or even 30 farms within one visit to the slaughterhouse. So there's a very big data potential. And I think also there's also an issue of visibility. So when I was in the slaughterhouse, it's easier to see the lesion, because sometimes the carcass was processed, so you can see the skin. The skin are becoming really clean, so you can see the lesion more clearly. And also there's an issue of disturbance. So whenever you go to, let's say, a commercial farm to take measures, you always risk disturbing the animals, because you have to go into the pen to score the tails or the skin lesions. And then if the animals are not used to human presence, you always cause some disturbance. But then there are also disadvantages. So people are still arguing the data we collected in the slaughterhouse, is it reflecting the accumulative experience of the animal, or is it just reflecting something happened in the later stage closer to slaughter? And also we have to think really carefully about what the data really convey. I will talk a little bit more about that later. And sometimes when we see data, we see studies that compare the data they collect on farm with the one they collect in the slaughterhouse. We should always be careful because they're not the same animals, and then you have to take into consideration of a lot of the confounding factors, maybe the time you collect the data, or just because they are from different animals, can you actually make a good comparison? And also because we look at animals in the slaughterhouse, so that's a very specific circumstance. Even let's say you do some behavior observation before in the lairage, so when they were waiting, and we have to understand that they just gone through all the transport, mixing maybe, so the behavior we observe, what is it really telling us? And it is specific to that circumstance, that environment. So, but just to summarize some recent findings, you can see that I put some reference here. I mean, there are more and more studies trying to find out what the meat inspection data can actually tell us about maybe health and welfare. So at least based on the recent findings, there is a strong positive correlation between tail lesions scored in the slaughterhouse and the visceral lesion in the carcass contamination. So we know that there is something going on there, although we cannot make any causal interpretation, but then there is a strong association. And then we can also see, because many studies come from different countries, we can kind of have a look at the different prevalence of tail lesions across countries. But of course, we should also be cautious when we interpret that, because all the studies, they are maybe using different scoring. So when we compare them of the prevalence, we have to be careful what it really tells us. So what I really want to ask is further question is welfare really assessed in the slaughterhouse, or what welfare is assessed in the slaughterhouse? So if we use the 5 freedoms model, for the freedom from hunger and thirst, yes, we can probably see that from the body condition score, the weight, or the days to slaughter, if they have that data. And for the freedom from discomfort, yes, we can probably see that by looking at the lesion, the contamination, and any injuries, lameness, this type of thing, we can kind of infer to their discomfort when they're still alive. And then also similarly for pain, injury, and disease, yes, it's easier to see by the lesions, contamination, disease, we can find in the slaughterhouse data. For the freedom to express normal behavior, it becomes a bit tricky. So yes, we probably have to see it from the other side, so we can tell that whether they have some abnormal, inverted comma, behavior, for example, like tail biting, fighting, this type of things, by looking at the tail lesions and skin lesions. But then we couldn't really know that whether they have the freedom to express other behaviors. And for the freedom from fear and distress, yes, of course, we know that tail lesions, skin lesions, these are all sorts of fear and stress. So yes, by looking at the lesions, we may have a little pick about what type of fear and stress they have been going through during their time. If we're using the 5 domains model by Meller, similarly for probably the previous 4 categories, we can more or less assess that in the slaughterhouse. But then if we're actually talking about the last domain, the mental state, especially the positive side of things, can we actually see that in the slaughterhouse? I think that's probably the question we really want to ask. So in order to hopefully to understand about this, so as I said, we combine the data collected from the 3 different undocked studies I've done. So in total, we have over 1,000 pigs, and then across a long time frame, and we have a detailed visceral lesion score for 2 studies. And also the other one, we only collect the visceral lesion from the veterinarians on site. And because, as I said, our research facility is newly built, so it is actually having a high health status when I conducted all these studies. So we don't have any disease outbreak or any symptoms or reduced production performance. So when we actually see the disease happening in these pigs or in the slaughterhouse, we see these disease lesions, we can maybe say it with a better confidence that, what this is telling us, maybe this is more strongly related to the tail biting we're seeing, instead of, because in many commercial studies, one of the things, the concerns is always that because you don't know, every farm has a different health status, maybe every farm has a different disease burden. So you can't really say that which come first. Is it tail biting come first, or maybe because the pigs are already sick, so they are more prone to be tail bitten. So this is what we're trying to say with our data. So we have we will compare the tail lesion and with the visceral lesion and carcass contamination to compare with the previous studies, and also we'll compare the lesions collected post-mortem with when we collect them when the pigs were still alive. And we also want to do is really to trace back the lesion longitudinally to their earlier lifetime to see how much we can actually see from the slaughterhouse data. So this is similar to what Grace Carroll did a study already published a study in 2018. They're also trying to look at how good the correlation between the tail lesion data in the slaughterhouse correlate with the pig's early life or later life lesions. And because we have these 3 different studies, they have different features, different stocking density, level of enrichment, and also we have the behavior recording. So what we really want to see is that whether we can really use the data collecting the slaughterhouse to tell the life history or the welfare, the real welfare status of the pigs. So our preliminary results, currently we're still doing the analysis. Well, we found that yes, when we score, we score a higher live or post-mortem tail loss scores. We also found a higher score for positive, higher likelihood to score positive for pleurisy, but not for other lung lesion or pericarditis, which is the 2 other common diseases we found in the slaughterhouse inspection. And we also found that when the pigs have worse tail lesion when they score live, or when they have higher tail loss score when score post-mortem, the probability of carcass contamination increase. These 2 all kind of agree with previous studies. And then we found a moderate correlation between the live and post-mortem tail loss score. But then for the correlation between the lesion score itself, it's much weaker. So I think this part we need to do a more in-depth analysis, as I mentioned, that to see maybe the slaughterhouse tail lesion only reflect the tail lesion score alive at a certain time point instead of the overall, the worst lesion scored. So I think based on our preliminary results and what other researchers have done so far on slaughterhouse inspection, what can the meat inspection data actually tell us? I think we definitely agree that they can show us a very good health status of the herd or of individual pig, depending on how they, of course, how they collect the data. And also we can more or less have a look at the tail biting prevalence from different studies or from different countries. Of course, taking into consideration that different tail lesion score systems were used. And also we can really see that there are some shared risk factors for certain diseases and tail biting. So for our study, I think we can say more clearly that this thing does exist because we have a farm that doesn't have any disease burden. So what's happening to this pig is very likely to be associated with tail biting, although we still cannot say that tail biting is causing this disease, because of course that's not our experimental design. So we can only say that better that the association is there, and it is not because the farm is already burdened by a certain disease. And the last thing is about the tail length. I think Anna Barros just published a really nice study, and then to stress the importance of looking at the tail length in the slaughterhouse. So not just from the 3 studies I mentioned, because I also have some experience storing tails for more cross-sectional studies. And then you can really see the length of the tail can kind of reflect whether a farm has problems. So usually if a farm has tail biting problem, you just see that they tend to dock the tail even shorter, just because they have problem of tail biting and they don't know how to deal with that. So they just keep trying to dock the tail shorter. So what Anna Barros and colleagues suggested is that for undocked pigs, there is long enough tail length that if we can find this long enough length in the slaughterhouse, we can actually say that those pigs were not really suffering from too much of a tail biting when they were alive. I think this is very interesting idea and very important as well. And then the docking status itself maybe can be an animal welfare measure in itself. But then at the same time, it might also cause some resistance from producers if we want to automate the tail length monitoring, because I think benchmarking is very important, especially in the context of Europe, so that we can know that how far we have progressed in terms of banning tail docking. But then, yes, it is actually very clear if we get this data from the slaughterhouse, the different lengths or if different severity of lesions, it can be really clear to see that which farms have problems, and then, yeah, they probably need to deal with. So looking into the future, I think we do need a standardized scoring system in order to do this type of benchmarking, and especially to compare between countries. And also because although it's easier to collect data in the slaughterhouse, it is still very labor intensive and takes time. So I think, yes, automation of tail length and lesion monitoring is quite important. I think some research groups are working on this already. And finally, I think we still need a better validation of which aspects of welfare can be actually covered in the slaughterhouse inspection. I think this is the part that I wish that the data from our study in the future can shed more light on, because we have the data from different studies, and also we have the behavior data, and then we know kind of already the welfare status of those pigs, and actually can we actually find those differences in the slaughterhouse data we collected. So finally, I want to just acknowledge my supervisor, Killing Rick and Dale, has been like really supportive of me during my PhD. I thoroughly enjoy my journey with them. The farm stand interns who helped me with my studies, and of course, my pigs have been giving me so many valuable data, and always something to think about. And just lastly, just my funders and the institutes that's involved in my PhD. And thank you for your attention and listening. And I really welcome any feedback, suggestion, or questions. I'd like to answer as well. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Great job, Jen. Just a question to get us started. I know this wasn't the main part, but going back to your second study, given what you know about tail biting enrichment, what do you envision as what would be your dream for how pigs should be housed in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think like we have a lot of different, housing types. I mean, of course, I've seen, pigs housed in outdoor herd. Yeah, they definitely have, better provision. But I think it's probably the question of, of course, we want, that's kind of the optimal solution. But then if we're looking at the solution for, let's say, a larger population of pigs that are housed currently, globally. So I would think that in terms of enrichment, providing some, like even the substrates we provide in the elevated route, it is still kind of limited, but then it is a very good start, because, you kind of compromise between what the pigs need and also what the producers can do in that type of housing system at this stage. But yeah, but of course, I mean, gradually, hopefully, there will be more, maybe a more, gradual revolution in terms of the whole housing system we are using to keep pigs.
Great, thanks. We have a question from Mark. It was a pleasure to listen to this very nice presentation. Perhaps the number of intact tails with intact hair plumes could be a slaughterhouse proxy of positive welfare. That's meant to be a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. Yeah, I haven't done anything with the hair samples, but I think that would be definitely, yeah, an interesting part to explore. Yes, I think, yeah, that's another thing in the slaughterhouse. Yes, I mean, I'm talking about more lesion scoring or behavior, but then yes, there is also opportunity to collect physiological measures as well. Like for example, you know, because the pigs are, once they are stunned, so there will be, you know, blood, there will be bleed. So there will be, you know, the possibility of collect blood samples and other samples that will be, hopefully, would tell us about positive welfare. But then, yeah, I think what types of, you know, what type of parameter we're looking at, that's probably also another very hot topic now. You know, what type of physiological measure can actually tell us about the positive welfare of pigs? But yeah, definitely.
Question from Joe Hills. Great talk, Jen, as usual. Just a thought on your opinion. Do you think the quantity of enrichment items at once is more important than one toy that is changed often?
Yes, I think at least based on my experience, I think we say that the quantity and the quality, they are really both important. So if you provide one very nice enrichment item for a group of pigs, I think sometimes it will cause, you know, even more, you know, competition and aggression. So yes, I would say that probably, you know, multiple items, and then of course in terms of quality, they still have to be biological relevant in a sense. Like, but then of course, because if you're comparing, let's say, oh, if I don't think that the solution will only be that you have to have a, you know, solid floor and provide the substrate on the floor like straw. I know that that could be expensive for producers, but then yeah, so I think that if you can find this type of items, so they could be, you know, they could be moved, they could be hanging on the wall or something, but then yeah, if you provide the good quantity plus a nice quality, I think that's probably, yeah, more important than, yeah, because Joe mentioned that one item you keep changing them. I think, yeah, that probably simultaneously is important. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jen. That's all the questions we have. And oh, there's one that just came in from Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think toys can be used in a clever way to prevent tail biting and allow the raising of pigs with intact tails?
Yes, I think so. I think, yeah, of course, that depends on, you know, what do we mean by toys? So, yes, I was saying that, yeah, if we select, you know, items, toys, you know, whatever that's relevant, that's biologically relevant to them, I do think that, I mean, judging by my study, you know, from the previous one to the study 1 to study 3, although yes, we did also reduce the stocking density, but then you can see that once you provide them with some really good, you know, quantity of enrichment items, you can already reduce the risk of tail biting for, you know, tremendously. So I do think I believe the importance of enrichment, environmental enrichment. I think I mean, tail biting is just one of the things, but I think that in general, pigs just need those environmental enrichment to stimulate their natural behavior, really. So I think, yeah, I would think that it can be used cleverly. I think I know that some researchers in Spain, they're also thinking about, you know, kind of an automation of swapping multiple items in a pen, you know, things like that. That would definitely, yeah, definitely help.
We have a question from Selena. Thank you, Jen. As you told us, tail biting is quite unpredictable. So if we use slaughterhouse evaluation rather than live observation, won't we blame farmers, a farmer who might have a problem once a year, rather than helping them find solutions?
Yes, very, very interesting, Selena. I think, Yeah, I think that's probably. I think I was talking about the benchmarking, but then yeah, I don't think that is for like picking up who's not doing the right thing or something, but rather than knowing which farms are having issues, and then so that maybe the advisors can or veterinarian can go in and intervene and then actually provide some advice for them what can be improved. But I think, yeah, I do think that they're both important. I think slaughterhouse evaluation can give us, an overview of what's going on maybe in that area, in that country, whatever. But then, yes, we do need to go into the farm, still trying to get some live observation. I was, yeah, that's the part I was trying to find out. What does the slaughterhouse inspection actually tell us? Can it actually reflect more what's happening with the pigs when they're alive? So I think, yeah, they're definitely both important, and I think that, yeah, as you said, that when you go into the farm, you can really actually see more problems that probably you would not be able to see just in the slaughterhouse.
Great. Linda says, great talk, thank you. Did you also check for the influence of internal factors on tail biting, like sex of the animal?
We always record the sex, but I think for the sex, it's still kind of controversial now. Like some studies say that female pigs they perform more tail biting than males, but it's not really conclusive. So for my own study, we always include that, but then we never really did find anything significant of sex. And yeah, I think it is interesting. I think the sex is also kind of confounded with other factors. For example, the females are sometimes in certain stage they're usually smaller. They probably are less capable of competition at the feeder, depending on what type of feeder you have. So yeah, I think it is proposed to be one of the factors, but then we haven't found any conclusion yet.
Great. That wraps up all of our questions. Jen, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of your great work and learning more about pigs. For everyone, this talk has been recorded and we will upload it on YouTube shortly.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.